Before the story begins, make sure to subscribe. These forgotten, real-life moments of impossible courage deserve to be told, and your support keeps them alive. April 13, 1970. 9:08 p.m. Central Time. The explosion tears through Oxygen Tank 2 with the force of a small bomb. Inside the service module of Apollo 13, 205,000 miles from Earth, metal ruptures. Insulation shreds. Wiring vaporizes. The tank's dome blows outward like a crushed aluminum can, sending debris spiraling into the void. The entire spacecraft shudders, a violent, bone-rattling jolt that throws astronaut Fred Hayes against his restraints. "Okay, Houston," Commander Jim Lovell's voice crackles through the static. His tone is unnervingly calm, the kind of calm that comes when your brain knows screaming won't help. "We've had a problem here." Jack Luzma, the Capcom on duty, responds immediately. "This is Houston. Say again, please." Lovell doesn't hesitate. "Houston, we've had a problem." Past tense. Not, we have. We've had. As if the problem has already happened, already changed everything, and now they're just living in its aftermath. In Mission Control, the room freezes. Controllers stare at their screens, watching telemetry data dissolve into chaos. Oxygen Tank 2 reads 0. Tank 1 is bleeding pressure. The service module's electrical system is dying. 3 men are hurtling through space in a crippled spacecraft, and every screen in Houston is painting the same picture: catastrophic failure. Flight Director Gene Kranz stands at his console, jaw set, eyes scanning the numbers. He doesn't say it aloud, but everyone in the room is thinking it. They're going to die out there. The lunar module, Aquarius, was designed to support 2 men for 2 days on the moon's surface. Now it's going to have to keep 3 men alive for 4 days in the vacuum of space. Its systems weren't built for this. Its life support wasn't rated for this. Its power budget couldn't handle this. And yet, Krantz turns to his team. "We're not losing these men. I don't care what it takes." But in the corner of the room, at a desk cluttered with schematics and coffee cups, a man named John Aaron is staring at his console. He's an electrical, environmental, and consumables manager, ECOM for short. 28 years old. Crew cut. Glasses. The kind of guy who never raises his voice, never grandstands, never draws attention to himself. He's looking at the power numbers for the lunar module. And something's wrong. The math doesn't work. Not even close. If they run Aquarius the way it was designed, with heaters, with guidance systems, with all the equipment they'd need to navigate home, the batteries will die 48 hours before re-entry. The spacecraft will go dark. The astronauts will freeze. And when they hit Earth's atmosphere, they'll have no way to orient the command module for a safe landing. They'll burn up on re-entry, or tumble into the Pacific at 25,000 miles per hour. John Aaron stares at the numbers and realizes no one else has seen it yet. The Apollo program was America's moonshot, literally. $25.4 billion invested. 400,000 people employed. A decade of engineering, testing, and calculation aimed at one goal: put a man on the moon and bring him home safely. Apollo 11 succeeded. Apollo 12 succeeded. By April 1970, lunar landings were starting to feel routine. The press barely covered them anymore. Apollo 13 was supposed to be just another mission, another flag planted, another set of rock samples collected, another victory lap for American ingenuity. But space doesn't care about momentum. The Apollo spacecraft consisted of 3 parts. Command module, Odyssey, the crew's home, where they'd live, sleep, and return to Earth. Service module, the powerhouse, containing oxygen tanks, fuel cells, propulsion, and life support systems. Lunar module, Aquarius, the lunar lander, designed for 2 men, 2 days, moon surface only. Apollo 13's service module carried 2 cryogenic oxygen tanks, each holding supercooled liquid oxygen at -297 degrees Fahrenheit. These tanks fed the fuel cells, which generated electricity and water for the crew. Lose one tank, and you'd still have redundancy. Lose both, and the command module would die. At 9:08 p.m. on April 13th, Tank 2 exploded. The cause? A damaged wire inside the tank, nicked during a routine test months earlier. When the crew stirred the oxygen, a standard procedure, that wire sparked. In the pure oxygen environment, the spark became a fireball. The tank ruptured. The dome blew off. And the explosion damaged Tank 1's plumbing, causing it to leak oxygen into space at a catastrophic rate. Within 2 hours, the service module was dead. The crew evacuated into Aquarius, the lunar module. It became their lifeboat, the only source of power, oxygen, and propulsion they had left. But Aquarius wasn't designed for this. Its batteries held 2,181 amp-hours of power. Its oxygen tanks were sized for 2 men on a 33-hour lunar landing. Its carbon dioxide scrubbers were designed for short-term use. Now it had to keep 3 men alive for 96 hours in deep space. The power budget was brutal. Guidance computer, 15 amps heaters, 12 amps communications, 8 amps cooling pumps, 6 amps cabin fans, 4 amps instrument displays, 3 amps. Total, 48 amps continuous draw. Multiply that by 96 hours, and you need 4,608 amp-hours. Aquarius had 2,181. The mission was doomed. The math said so. Flight Director Gene Kranz held an emergency meeting. Engineers crowded around tables covered in schematics. Someone suggested shutting down non-essential systems. Someone else suggested using the command module's re-entry batteries to supplement Aquarius. But those batteries were needed for re-entry. Turn them on early, and the crew wouldn't survive splashdown. The room buzzed with panic masked as professionalism. In the back, John Aaron sat quietly, running calculations on a yellow legal pad. He wasn't panicking. He was thinking. Because John Aaron had seen this before. Not this exact crisis, but something close. 2 years earlier, during Apollo 12, lightning struck the Saturn V rocket 36 seconds after launch. Every electrical system in the command module went haywire. Alarms screamed. Telemetry went dead. Mission control was blind. Controllers started preparing for an abort, a catastrophic failure that would end the mission and possibly kill the crew. But John Aaron didn't panic. He'd spent months studying the spacecraft's electrical systems, memorizing every bus, every switch, every backup circuit. He knew the telemetry patterns by heart. And when he saw the garbled data on his screen, he recognized it, a specific failure mode caused by a voltage drop in the spacecraft's instrumentation. He keyed his microphone. Flight. Ecom. Try SCE to AUX. The room went silent. What? Krantz said. SCE to AUX, Aaron repeated. Signal conditioning equipment to auxiliary. A switch on panel 8, almost never used, buried among hundreds of others. Commander Pete Conrad, strapped into the rocket, didn't know what SCE was. Lunar Module pilot Alan Bean did. He flipped the switch. The telemetry came back. The mission was saved. John Aaron became a legend that day. The Steely-Eyed Missile Man, Krantz called him. The guy who stays calm when the world is burning. Now, 2 years later, the world was burning again. And John Aaron was the only one who knew how to put out the fire. John Aaron was born in 1943 in Ardmore, Oklahoma, a small town where the loudest sound was the whistle of the Santa Fe Railroad cutting through wheat fields at dawn. His father was a mechanic. His mother worked at the post office. They didn't have much, but they had books. John read everything: science fiction, engineering manuals, almanacs, repair guides. By age 12, he could take apart a tractor engine and put it back together blindfolded. He wasn't flashy. He didn't raise his hand in class. He didn't play football or run for student council. But when the teacher asked a question no one could answer, John would quietly explain it, clearly, precisely, without arrogance. His classmates called him the professor, but it wasn't a compliment. In small-town Oklahoma, being too smart made you weird. John didn't care. He loved the purity of systems, how inputs became outputs, how problems had solutions if you just thought hard enough. He went to the University of Oklahoma, studied electrical engineering, graduated with honors, and in 1964, at age 21, he walked into NASA's Mission Control in Houston. He was a nobody, the youngest guy in the room. No flight experience. No military background. Just a kid from Oklahoma with a slide rule and a notebook. The older engineers, test pilots, Air Force veterans, men who'd built rockets and flown missions, looked at him like he was lost. But John Aaron had one gift. He saw patterns no one else saw. During training simulations, while other controllers focused on their specific systems, propulsion, life support, communications, Aaron studied the whole spacecraft. He memorized the electrical schematics. He traced every wire, every circuit, every backup system. He didn't just know what things did. He knew why they did it, and what would happen if they failed. He built mental models. If this bus fails, power reroutes here. If that sensor dies, telemetry looks like this. He could diagnose problems from data patterns alone, without needing the astronauts to explain what was broken. During Apollo 12's lightning strike, that obsessive preparation saved the mission. Now, during Apollo 13, it would save 3 lives. John sat at his console on the night of April 13th, watching the power numbers. Around him, controllers shouted updates, ran simulations, debated strategies. Gene Kranz was coordinating re-entry trajectories. The guidance team was calculating burn angles. The life support team was figuring out carbon dioxide scrubber workarounds. But no one was talking about power, because the power problem seemed unsolvable. The math was simple. Aquarius didn't have enough electricity to get home. Shutting down a few systems wouldn't cut it. They needed a miracle. John Aaron didn't believe in miracles. He believed in systems. And he'd just realized something. Everyone was calculating power usage wrong. The standard procedure for running the lunar module assumed normal operations. That meant keeping systems online for redundancy, maintaining cabin temperature at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, running guidance computers continuously, and powering heaters to prevent equipment from freezing. But Apollo 13 wasn't normal operations. John Aaron pulled up the LM Systems manual, a 3-inch thick binder filled with specifications, power ratings, and operational limits. He flipped to the power budget section. His eyes scanned the columns: amps per system, hours of operation, total consumption. He grabbed his calculator. Guidance computer, 15 amps. What if they only turned it on for course corrections? 2 hours total instead of 96. Savings, 1,350 amp-hours. Heaters, 12 amps. What if they let the spacecraft freeze? The equipment was rated to -100 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold wouldn't kill it. Not immediately. Savings, 1,152 amp-hours. Cabin fans, displays, non-essential telemetry. All optional. All draining power. Shut them down. Savings, 672 amp-hours. John's pen moved faster. The problem wasn't that Aquarius lacked power. The problem was that NASA's procedures assumed they'd use power the way they always had, safely, redundantly, comfortably. But comfort didn't matter anymore. Survival did. If they stripped Aquarius down to the absolute bare minimum, life support, communications, and guidance only when necessary, the numbers changed. The spacecraft could make it. Barely. The margins were terrifying. 12 amp-hours of reserve power. That was it. One miscalculation, one extra system left on, one burn angle slightly off, and they'd run out of electricity before splashdown. But it was possible. John Aaron stood up. His chair scraped against the floor. Across the room, Gene Kranz was in a heated discussion with the trajectory team. John walked over. Flight. Kranz turned. What is it, Ecom? John Aaron didn't waste words. We can make it on Aquarius power. But we have to shut down almost everything. Kranz frowned. How much is almost everything? Guidance computer off except for burns. All heaters off. Cabin temperature drops to near freezing. Minimal telemetry. No redundancy. That's insane, someone said. The equipment will freeze. It's rated for it, John replied. Rated, sure, but no one's ever tested it in a real mission. What if something fails? Then they die, John said quietly. But if we don't do this, they die for sure. The room went silent. Krantz stared at John. "You're certain about the power math?" "Yes." "What's the margin?" 12 amp-hours. Someone whistled. 12 amp-hours was nothing, the power equivalent of running a light bulb for 12 hours. In a spacecraft hurtling through space, where every system mattered, 12 amp-hours was a rounding error. Krantz didn't blink. "We're doing it. Ecom, write the procedure. I want every system shutdown sequenced, every power draw calculated. You have 2 hours. John Aaron nodded. He sat back down at his console, pulled out a fresh legal pad, and started writing. He wasn't writing a procedure. He was writing a blueprint for survival. And if he got one number wrong, 3 men would freeze to death in the dark. April 14th, 1970. 2 a.m. The mission control room smelled like burnt coffee and adrenaline. Controllers had been awake for 17 hours straight. Shift changes came and went, but the core team stayed. Gene Krantz refused to leave. John Aaron refused to leave. They were going to see this through. John had filled 12 pages with calculations. Every system, every amp, every hour. He cross-checked the numbers 3 times. Then he handed the procedure to Krantz. Krantz read it in silence. His face didn't change. When he finished, he looked up. "This is the coldest spacecraft shutdown in NASA history." "Yes, sir." "If the equipment doesn't restart, they won't be able to orient for re-entry." "They'll burn up." "Yes, sir." Krantz folded the paper. "Send it up." The procedure was transmitted to Apollo 13. Commander Jim Lovell read it in the frozen cabin of Aquarius. The temperature was already dropping. Condensation formed on the walls. Every breath came out as vapor. "Houston, you want us to shut down everything?" "That's affirmative, 13. Guidance computer off except for burns. All heaters off. Telemetry to minimum." Fred Hayes, the lunar module pilot, shook his head. "Jack, we'll be flying blind." "You'll have enough power to get home," Capcom Jack Loosma replied. "That's what matters." Lovell looked at his crewmates. Jack Swigert, the command module pilot, was shivering. Fred Hayes looked pale, his lips tinged blue. They'd been rationing water, sleeping in shifts, breathing stale air. Now they were about to turn off the heaters and let the spacecraft freeze around them. "Understood, Houston," Lovell said. "We're shutting her down." One by one, the systems went dark. The guidance computer's hum stopped. The cabin fans fell silent. The instrument lights dimmed. The heaters clicked off, and the temperature began to plummet. Within hours, it would hit 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Then lower. The walls would frost over. The windows would fog. The crew would huddle together in their flight suits, hands numb, trying not to think about the cold. In mission control, John Aaron watched the telemetry drop away. Each system shutdown registered as a flat line on his screen. Guidance, offline. Heaters, offline. Displays, offline. It felt like watching someone die. But the power consumption numbers told a different story. Aquarius was now drawing 14 amps instead of 48. The batteries, which had been draining at a catastrophic rate, stabilized. The math worked. The spacecraft could make it. But there was another problem. John Aaron had violated NASA protocol. The lunar module had never been tested in this configuration. Every procedure, every system, every operational limit had been designed around normal missions. 2 men, moon surface, controlled environment. Shutting down heaters, running equipment below rated temperatures, operating with zero redundancy, none of that was approved. If something failed, NASA would blame him. If the crew died, NASA would blame him. But John Aaron had done the math. And the math didn't lie. He sat at his console, alone with his calculations, knowing that he'd just bet 3 lives on a power budget scribbled on a legal pad. "Flight, Ecom," he said quietly. Krantz turned. "Go ahead. We're committed now. If anything fails, we won't have power to recover." Krantz nodded. "I know. And if this doesn't work—" "It'll work," Krantz interrupted. "Because you don't make mistakes, John." John Aaron didn't respond. He just stared at his screen, watching the numbers hold steady, and prayed to a god he wasn't sure he believed in that the cold wouldn't kill them before they got home. April 17, 1970. 12 p.m. Central Time. For 3 days, the crew of Apollo 13 had lived in a frozen tomb. The temperature inside Aquarius had dropped to 38 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that their breath crystallized on the walls, cold enough that condensation dripped from the instrument panels, cold enough that Fred Hayes developed a kidney infection from dehydration and cold exposure. They stopped sleeping. They stopped eating. They just floated in the dark, wrapped in whatever insulation they could find, waiting for the moment they'd either live or die. The spacecraft was on course. The trajectory was locked. The guidance computer, powered on for only brief burns, had done its job. Now came the hardest part, re-entry. To survive splashdown, the crew had to transfer back into the command module, power it up, and jettison Aquarius. But the command module, Odyssey, had been offline for 3 days. Its systems were frozen. Its batteries were untested. And it had to restart flawlessly, because if it didn't, the astronauts would have no way to orient the capsule during re-entry. They'd tumble. The heat shield would fail. They'd burn up at 25,000 miles per hour. John Aaron had saved their power. But now they had to spend it. At 12:30 p.m., the crew began the transfer procedure. They floated through the narrow tunnel connecting Aquarius to Odyssey, hauling equipment, flipping switches, reading checklists. Jack Swigert settled into the command module pilot seat, the same seat he'd occupied 4 days earlier, when Odyssey was warm and functional and the mission was still normal. Now the cabin was a freezer. Ice coated the windows. The control panels were dark. Swigert's hands shook as he reached for the master power switch. "Houston, we're beginning command module power-up." "Roger, 13. We're standing by." In mission control, every console was staffed. Every engineer was watching. Gene Krantz stood at his station, arms crossed. John Aaron sat at Ecom, eyes locked on his screen. This was the moment. If the batteries failed, if the frozen systems didn't restart, if the guidance platform couldn't align, it was over. Swigert flipped the switch. The instrument panel flickered. Lights blinked on, weak, but steady. The guidance computer booted. The displays initialized. One by one, the systems came alive. "Houston, we have power." A ripple of relief swept through mission control. But it wasn't over yet. The guidance platform, the gyroscope that told the spacecraft which way was up, had been offline for 3 days. It needed to be realigned using star sightings, a delicate process that required precise navigation. If the alignment was off, the command module would enter the atmosphere at the wrong angle. Too steep, and they'd burn up. Too shallow, and they'd skip off the atmosphere like a stone on water, sailing into space forever. Lovell took the sextant. He peered through the frozen window, searching for stars. But condensation obscured everything. He wiped the glass. Still cloudy. He breathed on it, trying to clear it. Nothing. "Houston, I can't see the stars. Too much condensation." Panic flickered through mission control. Without star sights, they couldn't align the guidance platform. Without alignment, they couldn't control re-entry. John Aaron leaned into his microphone. 13. Ecom. Try using the sun. It's bright enough to cut through the condensation. Lovell paused. Using the sun was unconventional. Star sightings were the standard. But the sun was a star. A very bright one. Copy. Houston. Trying the sun. Lovell adjusted the sextant. Found the sun. Locked it in. The guidance computer processed the data. The platform aligned. "Houston, we have a good alignment." "Roger, 13. Your go for jettison." At 1 p.m., the crew said goodbye to Aquarius. The lunar module that had kept them alive, cold, dark, barely functional, was released. It drifted away, tumbling into space, a silent testament to impossible survival. Odyssey was alone now. The command module, with its 3 astronauts and its heat shield and its tiny reserve of power, fell toward Earth. At 25,000 miles per hour. The atmosphere hit like a wall. The capsule shuddered. The heat shield glowed orange, then white, vaporizing as it absorbed the friction of re-entry. Inside, the crew was slammed into their seats by the deceleration. 4 Gs, then 5, then 6. The cabin heated up. The windows went opaque with ionized air. Radio signals died. For 4 minutes, Mission Control had no telemetry, no voice contact, no way to know if Odyssey was intact. 4 minutes of silence. In Mission Control, John Aaron stared at his blank screen. Gene Kranz stood motionless. The room held its breath. And then, Odyssey, Houston. Do you read? Silence. Odyssey, Houston. Do you read? A crackle of static. And then, calm as ever, hello, Houston. This is Odyssey. It's good to see you again. Mission Control erupted. Controllers jumped from their seats, shouting, hugging, pounding desks. Gene Kranz exhaled, maybe the first real breath he'd taken in 4 days. John Aaron sat quietly at his console. He didn't cheer. He didn't celebrate. He just nodded. The math had worked. April 17th, 1970. 1:50 p.m. Odyssey hit the water 11 miles from the recovery ship USS Iwo Jima. Navy helicopters scrambled. Divers jumped into the Pacific, secured the capsule, and opened the hatch. Jim Lovell emerged first, pale and exhausted but grinning. Fred Hayes was hypothermic, barely conscious. Jack Swigert climbed out shivering, squinting in the sunlight. They were alive. NASA called it a successful failure. The mission didn't land on the moon, but it proved something more valuable, that human ingenuity could overcome impossible odds. The investigations began immediately. Engineers dissected the service module's wreckage. They traced the explosion back to the damaged wire in Oxygen Tank 2. They rewrote procedures. They redesigned systems. They added safeguards to prevent it from happening again. But when the final reports were written, one name appeared more than any other: John Aaron. Gene Kranz wrote in his internal memo, "Ecom's power-down procedure saved the mission. Without his calculations, the crew would not have survived." The astronauts, in their debriefings, credited Aaron's plan. Lovell said, "We were flying a refrigerator. But it worked." NASA awarded John Aaron the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He was featured in Life magazine, profiled as the Steely-Eyed Missile Man who thought of everything. He became a legend in Mission Control, the guy who stayed calm, did the math, and saved 3 lives. But John Aaron didn't feel like a hero. He felt like someone who'd gotten lucky, because the margins had been razor-thin. 12 amp-hours of reserve power. If the guidance computer had taken 1 extra minute to boot, if the heaters had failed and frozen the batteries, if the crew had used 1 more system than planned, they'd have run out of power before re-entry. And they'd be dead. John didn't talk about that in interviews. He didn't mention the sleepless nights, the legal pad covered in crossed-out calculations, the moment when he'd realized that he was betting 3 lives on numbers he'd scribbled in a Houston office at 2 a.m. He just did his job. In the years after Apollo 13, John Aaron continued working at NASA. He helped design power systems for the space shuttle. He trained new controllers. He became one of the most respected engineers in the agency's history. But he never forgot the weight of that moment. When asked, decades later, how he'd stayed so calm during the crisis, John Aaron shrugged. "I just did the math," he said. "The math doesn't lie." But there was something else, something he didn't say in public, something he only admitted to his wife late at night when the memories kept him awake. "I was terrified the whole time. I just didn't let it show." 50 years later, Apollo 13 is studied in engineering schools, military academies, and business leadership courses. It's held up as the gold standard for crisis management. Stay calm, trust your team, solve the problem in front of you. But the deeper lesson is quieter. John Aaron didn't save Apollo 13 by being the loudest voice in the room. He didn't grandstand. He didn't demand credit. He just saw a pattern no one else saw, did the math, and trusted the numbers even when the stakes were life and death. That's the nature of real heroism. It's not dramatic. It's not flashy. It's a guy with a slide rule and a legal pad, sitting in a room full of people who are panicking, and calmly saying, "I think I see a way." The world remembers Jim Lovell, the commander who kept his crew alive. It remembers Gene Kranz, the flight director who refused to lose a mission. It remembers the astronauts, the heroes in space. But engineers remember John Aaron. Because sometimes the most important person in the room is the one no one notices. The one doing the math. The one who sees the problem before anyone else does. The one who, when everyone else says, impossible, quietly replies, let's find out. John Aaron retired from NASA in 2000. He lives quietly now, in a small house outside Houston. He doesn't give many interviews. He doesn't attend many reunions. But every year on April 17th, he receives letters. From students. From engineers. From people who heard his story and felt inspired to solve their own impossible problems. And every year, he writes back. Always with the same closing line. Trust the math. And never stop thinking. That's the legacy. Not medals. Not fame. Just the knowledge that when the world was ending, one man stayed calm, did the work, and brought 3 people home. That's all heroism ever really is.